Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining me here. Today, we're here to talk about beliefs, perceptions, hallucinations, and delusions. I want to start off with a story. This is from 1894, and it's an event in France that has changed history forever. And many of us would not have ever heard of this story before. So in 1894, the French military detected there was some espionage going on, and some of its top secrets were being leaked to the Imperial German army. So they investigated and they found in a trash bin some torn up pieces of paper. So they patched this together and voila, they came up with this complete script of secrets actually being passed. And so what they did is they started then going around and investigating to see who might have been this person who was the perpetrator of this crime, and they wanted to find a spy. And then they identified this one fellow in the French army. His name was Alfred Dreyfus. Now, they started quickly finding evidence to show that Dreyfus was probably the perpetrator of this crime. He was the spy. He was the one who was telling out all the secrets. Now, there was not really any factual evidence except to see that there was some resemblance of his handwriting with that script, that the piece of paper that they found. Now, what was more important in this case was that he was the only Jewish officer in the French army serving at that point of time. So quickly, evidence was mounted against Dreyfus. He was tried and he was sent away into prison, into one of the worst prisons under the French government at that time, which was in French Guiana. It was called Devil's Island. And as the name speaks for itself, it was quite a arduous place to be able to survive. So when then years go by, 2 years go by, and they notice that this fellow is sitting there in this Devil's Island, carrying out his prison term, but the espionage seems to be continuing. Their secret seems to be leaking out from the French government into the German army. Then they start investigating. There's this new person within the anti-espionage department of the French army. His name was Georges Picot. Now, this chap picks up the case and he starts investigating, and he notices that perhaps it was not Dreyfus to begin with. There was another person. So they find this other officer who possibly was the person who was carrying out the espionage. Now they compare his handwriting. Now his handwriting is actually even more closer to that script, that document that they had found. And then they try him, and then they realize maybe it's not him. And they decided to free him. Now, 2 days after they free him, this guy shaves off his mustache and he runs away from France. He flees. Now they bring Dreyfus back, try him again. Now there's so much division. There's so much. The whole thing has created a ruckus within the entire military, not only the military, but the entire country is now involved in this case. And they find that they find even more evidence against Dreyfus and now convict him to another 10 years in prison. So he's sent back to Devil's Island. And now there is a movement going on, sort of an undercover movement, underlying movement going on, trying to really find out if indeed the entire country was wrong. So this lady called Émile Zola, who writes in the press, and she puts out these articles that talk about the possibility that the entire country may be wrong about having convicted this person, and they could be being in a mass delusion, and they probably need to re-examine. She brings out certain evidences that could be in the favor of Dreyfus being innocent. And so a lot of the people who are the learned, the educated, the thinkers of the land, if you will, they start rallying behind Émile Zola. Georges Picot then re-brings this case into the president of France at that point in time. And the first president of France now knows that this is a very political thing, but he uses his power to be able to give a pardon to Dreyfus because he believed there's not substantial evidence to be able to, and also he served his prison term for quite a number of years. So eventually in 1906, so 12 years after he has been imprisoned, Dreyfus is released. He's pardoned. Now, Dreyfus goes on to accept the pardon, goes on to re-enlist himself in the military, goes on to fight in World War I, and he has not changed his heart. He has not lost hopes, and he goes on to do this. He goes on to show his loyalty to the country. Out of this episode came two specific things that have changed history forever. A, the concept, the word intellectual arose from this movement. By the way, this movement was called l'affaire, or the affair in English, because it became such a national thing that the entire country was divided. Everybody was talking about it in France. The second thing that came out of this episode, the l'affaire, was the word Zion. So there was a movement in France and then across all of Europe that said that the Jewish people do not belong to Europe and they need to be condemned. They need to go off and find their own place. And the creation of a Jewish state was actually a movement that started, unknowns to me and probably unknowns to many of you listening for the first time about this story, that it actually didn't start from Germany and the Nazis as most of us tend to believe. It actually started elsewhere in France. So Zion and intellectual. So folks, so here's an example of where a mass delusion falsely convicted and put cruelty, unnecessary cruelty on somebody who did not do anything wrong. Ask yourself, how many more episodes of delusion are we suffering from? So in the course of today, I'm going to talk about 3 things that are examples of delusion, 3 things that are the causes of delusions. How does the brain work? How do we synthesize something that are data points that make us believe in something that's not really true? And I'm going to give you 3 remedies for it, of how we can examine and break out of that bubble of that delusion that we begin to believe in. Okay, so first of all, the brain, I want you to understand this evolution of the human brain has been a survival mechanism. We take disconnected dots and we basically connect them. We believe in all kinds of stuff. Believing is natural, and disbelief is actually skepticism, is unnatural to the human brain. So we always are believing in something. Now the question is, what is it? So as primates, we're always seeking to find patterns. We're seeking to make connections. For example, you might have heard about this research, this experiment called Pavlov's dog experiment. They brought out the food, the dog's mouth watered, and the bell was rung. And so next time the bell was rung, the food was not brought out, the dog's mouth salivated. Anyway, so we are also like that. We make these connections between things that are actually not necessarily meaningful entities. So we do find things that are meaningful and we do make connections, but the problem occurs when we try to connect and rationalize and simplify meaningless events. So we're all hallucinating all the time. But when we agree on our hallucinations, we call it reality. We agree that that is the sense of what is truth. And that therein lies the problem. So let me give you some examples of common aspects of illusion, delusions, or hallucinations. So very simple. Now, if you were seeing a person walking and somebody asked you, estimate his speed of walking, imagine if you were shown the picture of a cheetah a few minutes before that question was brought up. The chances are you will estimate that man's speed to be lower than if a tortoise picture was shown to you before you were asked the question. So you judge the man's speed differently based on what is prevalent in your mind when you were asked the question. The second thing is, if you just came out of a workout and you see a hill, the hill will look steeper after the workout than before the workout. And if you imagine, the third delusion is a simple aspect of it is that if you're carrying a backpack and if you're walking, a landmark will seem further than it really is. So now let's talk about the classifications of how do we create these beliefs and perceptions. So there are broadly two categories of belief systems. Number one, there's a mindset. Okay, so let's examine the mindset of this. The number one mindset is something that scientists refer to as the soldier mindset. So now in a soldier's mind, something is worth exalting. So pride of the nation, honor, so our freedom, whatever it is, right? So that is something worth exalting, something that's praiseworthy, something worth dying for. And there are some other facts, some other aspects that are worth shooting down. Now, this is subconscious in most of us. Now, you may or may not notice it, but I'll give you a very specific example that makes the case. Now, imagine you were at a game, at a match of any kind. Pick your own favorite sport. Now, if the referee made a call for a foul against your team, you will be all mad and you'll be wanting to find faults with him. You'll justify so many different ways in which he is absolutely wrong about making that call. Now, as opposed to, if the referee made a call in favor of your team, you'll be completely fine. You will not question it. Your brain will not want to work. You completely agree with him. So this is what is called a motivated mindset, right? So you have an unconscious bias that motivates you to think and look in a particular direction. Now, the second kind of a mindset is what is referred to by scientists as a scout mindset. Now, what are some symptoms of a scout? Scout in the sense of a person of reconnaissance, not the soldier in the front line, but the one who is actually scoping the territory out. He's somebody who is open. He doesn't know. He or she doesn't know what's the possibilities of what lies ahead. He's curious. The person is the scout is curious. Curious to find out, to examine, to look at things and say, why is something the way it is? Could there be a truth that is deeper than what meets my eye? And a scout is somebody who's grounded. That means if scout has come up with a prediction, a decision, but he or she finds evidence to the contrary of it, their life view will not shatter. They are not threatened of their own existence because what they thought once is actually wrong. So they take it, they feel very grounded, they feel completely okay with picking up that new information and changing their view of the world. Okay, so let's see how this refers to our education system. There was once a famous philosopher who said, if you want to build a ship, don't go shouting out orders to collect wood, divide the labor, etc., but instead teach them to yearn for the vast open sea. Think about how education is these days. We do not need more to improve our judgment, our thinking, our ability to rationalize everything. It's not about instructions and logic, rhetoric, probability, or economics. What we must be taught to do is to feel intrigued, to be in awe, to be able to look at things, examine things in a way that it's okay if we were wrong about our perceptions of things. It's okay. We should actually be proud when we come out of something and say, what I believed yesterday was actually not true. And look at this. Today, I have found some piece of information, some evidence to actually grow my awareness, to improve my ability to perceive things more clearly. Okay. Now, the creation of illusion is a very complex event, and you're constantly doing it. And guess what? You're constantly believing that illusion that you're creating. And like I said, when many of us agree on an illusion, we call that reality. Now, there are so many different illusions. So now there's a lot of competition around, the belief systems and so on and so forth. But then things comes along called science, which tells us otherwise. And there's huge resistance initially to those things. Now, there's all kinds of information. There's all kinds of division a gap between science and this mass sense of reality. such as, for example, human rights, animal rights. And one thing that I think is uncontested and is actually detrimental to the future of the human race as we speak right now is this idea around climate change. Now, science tells us, 87% of scientists tell us that climate change is directly a result of human activity, whereas only 50% believe that we are responsible for what we are facing, what we're dealing with on the global climate scenario. Now, if you'll hear things like, when it becomes cold in the winter, then people start saying, what happened now? Where's your climate change that you were talking about? When snow falls somewhere, it says, people start tweeting that says, I have 20 inches of climate change in my backyard. Where's all your logic? Where's your climate change concepts right now, right? So there's a scientist that by the name of Dr. Marshall Shepard, who has explained this very beautifully and simply. He says, weather is your mood, climate is your personality. Just like swings in your mood do not represent your personality, swings in climate, swings in weather do not represent the overall change in the climate. Sit with that for a second. We oftentimes tend to be very quick and judgmental about symptomatic, temporary changes in climate and say, uh-oh, it's not true. But look at the global patterns. Look at all the evidence science is showing. Look, now we have satellites from space that are able to actually look at these changes on a macroscopic level and are telling us, look at the rate in which we're getting typhoons and hurricanes and cyclones. It's something to think about. So now, how does this mass delusion, where does it all start from? So there are three aspects of psychology that I want to lay out in front of you that explain where does this illusion begin. The first concept is called confirmation bias. We as humans, our brains have an uncanny knack to be able to see evidence to confirm what we already believe in. Just like if we believe that our team should win, we talked about that sports event, we tend to find evidence in the ruling of the referee in our favor. Things look meaningful as long as they agree, and I don't have to get into the discomfort of having challenged my belief system. That's called confirmation bias. The second concept is called the Dunning-kruger theory. This is a theory that came out of Cornell University, where the scientists say that we tend to think that we know more than we actually do. In other words, we underestimate what we don't know. And the third concept around illusion is called cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is where new information comes around to us that contradicts our belief, that causes us discomfort. I'll give you a very simple way of understanding this. It happened to me, and when I heard about this idea of cognitive dissonance, it was like, voila, yes, I've fallen into that trap. So the story goes back about 3 years ago. I was with my family in South Africa. We were waiting outside Kruger National Park. We were in this beautiful resort, and we were supposed to get picked up at 6 o'clock. All arrangements has been made prior for us to be picked up by the safari guide on his beautiful vehicle, open top vehicle, where we'll be seeing animals all day. He said, we're going to come pick you up at 6 o'clock. Sure enough, I made sure that everybody had alarms. We'd all woken up at 5. We were all ready, had breakfast and everything, because it's going to be a long day. The guy doesn't show up at 6. It's 6:30. It's 7. And I am getting very anxious. I'm getting very upset because I had to wake up everybody, rally the troops. There were little kids in the group, get them to get ready. At that time was not easy, as you can imagine. And the guy shows up at 7:30. When he came at 7:30, I blew the fuse. I was really mad at this guy. And then he was like, wait. He was trying to tell me something which I was not willing to hear. And what he was actually trying to tell me at that time when my mind was completely shut off was that we tried contacting you. We left a message for you yesterday at the hotel, and the hotel confirmed to us that they passed on the message to somebody in your family that we were going to be late. And when I found that out, that they actually did that, I felt so little. I felt so bad. I didn't know where to hide my face. So that, my friends, is cognitive dissonance. And a cognitive dissonance has two sides of the coin. There's one that where you feel grounded and you're willing to accept and you're willing to grow and learn from it and say that I was wrong and accept this new piece of information to change my sense of reality. But then there's another part of us which will keep trying to avoid it, will try to hate the messenger, etc. Okay, so ask yourself, where do you find yourself stumbling in these three things? The confirmation bias, Dunning-kruger, and the cognitive dissonance. And we live at a time today that makes all of this effects compounded because of this wonderful gadgets that we have on our phones, that we have in our hands, that have these amazing technology called social media, where we are engulfed with information 24/7, 365. We have so much bombarding us that we cannot tell what's real and what's fake. It's as if we know more, we're getting information overload, but we don't understand anything. We don't understand enough. Where the data is not necessarily converting into knowledge, and the knowledge is not converting into wisdom. So I challenge you to examine yourself and challenge you to burst out of this bubble that you have created, because we all are responsible for our own sense, that bubble of belief, our own delusions, our own perceptions, and see if we can participate in a common reality that underpins everything. Now, there is something that is actually working heavily against you, and that is your sense of sight. Folks, I want you to know that the visual processing, so when your eyes are taking in information, the brain has a disproportionate affinity towards the visual input than all other inputs. Just even in the human brain, 1/3 of all your processing power is allocated for the brain in terms of volume. 1/3 of all the space in your brain has been allocated towards visual processing. And 2/3 of all the computation, the processing, the synthesizing power has been allocated to the visual stimulus. So what you see seems to trump every other sense that would probably skew it in the favor of the visual input. So then how do we seek out the truth when we're being bombarded with this visual stimulus of which we can't tell right from wrong, the truth from the fake? So I'm going to give you 3 simple steps, 3 simple methods, and I want you to each try this on your own and see how that's going to make a difference. Number 1, try to seek out, make an inventory of your biases. Now, I know a lot of times we don't even know where we have the bias, but remember I talked about this thing called cognitive dissonance, where you find that you say something, you've done something, you believe in something, but something just doesn't feel right. There's that discomfort. That's why the word dissonance. So when you have that discomfort about something that you're doing, saying, or believing, sit with it. Try to explore, try to peel off the skin from it and say, could there be an underlying truth that's different from what I am perceiving or I'm making myself believe, or I've been telling a story in my head? Okay, so make a list, make an inventory of those things. Second, evaluate your sources. Folks, I can't tell you how many times I get bombarded by people that I know, I love, and I trust by these media messages, these articles, these pictures, right? These pieces, supposedly these are evidence, then I just feel that sense of discomfort and say, you know what? This is like, oh my God, shocking. Could this be true? So I go and verify. Right? So there are different sources of which you can go and verify. One of my go-to places is this website called Snopes.org. Snopes.com, Snopes.org. It's a website that basically they have been working tirelessly to debunk myths on the internet, because today internet has become our default mode of communication. Now, I've seen that that website has gone down, has been so backlogged since COVID hit, because COVID has become all the other stuff, the delusional stuff on steroids. There's way too many myths and fake news and all of these propaganda that the people who are investigating, investigators, are not able to keep up with. But nevertheless, try to validate if indeed this is coming from a credible source. Find your own way to do it. The third thing that I ask you to do about breaking out of your illusions, delusions, and hallucinations and perceptions are take the other out to lunch. Take the other out to lunch. What do I mean by that? Now, when you have a belief system, there's obviously there's the other side. There's somebody who lives on the other side of the tracks. There's somebody who is on the other side of the coin, somebody who looks different, somebody who believes in different, somebody who prays differently, right? The non-believer from your perspective, right? If you're a Democrat, go take a Republican out for lunch. If you're a Muslim, take a Catholic out for lunch. If you are a climate change enthusiast believer, take a disbeliever out for lunch. Sit down and have a conversation. Now, I have some tips, I have some suggestions on how to make the conversation. Try to have a conversation where you're not trying to persuade. Try to have a conversation where you're not trying to defend your point of view. And this is the hard one. Try not to interrupt when the other person is speaking. I challenge you, try to find somebody, you know, the person who just even the thought of the person will make you lose your appetite, will make smoke come out of their ears when you think about them, when you hear about their opinions and their belief systems. Try to find those kind of people. That makes it very interesting. There is a quote I'll never forget. I used to run the Men's Wisdom Circle along with my friend Mario, who's no longer here with us on this earth. And we had a Jewish doctor who is working on Israel-Palestine peace treaties, peace conversations. Okay, he told me one thing I'll never forget. The enemy is one whose story who you have not yet heard. An enemy is one whose story you have not yet heard. Okay, so try to listen to other side of the story. And what happens is when you become a listener, you are basically building a bridge, and the bridge goes both ways. They will be willing to listen to you because you were willing to listen. As you open your heart and your mind and your ears, you're essentially opening up the other person to do the same. So try these three things first. Take inventory of your beliefs, of your biases, evaluate your sources, and take the other out to lunch. With that, I'd like to turn this conversation into an experience, and I want you to first of all drop into your body. And the way I want you to do that is go ahead and put your palms facing each other and try to extend them out as far as you can in front of you. Try to create a little bend in your elbows on both arms, and thereby creating a circle with your arms in front of you. Now taking a deep, comfortable breath, filling your belly. And as you exhale, I want you to look down into the circle that's in front of you. Only letting your neck roll into the circle. You're not bending your back. You're just keeping the back completely stretched using your palms pushing out each other. And as you come up, you inhale. Now let's repeat this a couple more times. As you exhale, look down into the circle as far low as you can go. And as you inhale, I want you to come back up. One last time. Exhale, going into the circle, looking into the well. Inhale, come back up and rest your shoulders. Self-awareness is easy and begins simply by taking a mental step back. Take a step back and observe your thoughts, feelings, attitudes, and actions. When you do this, you will learn about yourself. And that learning is the basis of personal change. And growth comes from that learning. If your eyes aren't already closed, I suggest you close them for a few minutes. What do you see? What enters your awareness? And what does that which enters your awareness tell you? Don't judge it, just see it. Just watch it and accept it. Allow whatever is happening in your mind, your thoughts, and your feelings. Just let them be. You may begin to notice the mind settling, the body becoming relaxed. And you begin to notice a sense of peace, a calmness. And the more you sit with it, just being, this peace begins to predominate any other emotion or feeling. Your ultimate responsibility is for your own awareness. In your awareness is where you hold your world. It is here that you hold your humanity. It doesn't exist anywhere else. It's intangible. And then you create in the world what you hold in your awareness. If you hold resentment, blame, anger against someone, then that's what's going to manifest in the world. If you are suffering, that's okay. As long as we keep sleeping in our awareness, this suffering will continue to increase. Because suffering has come to wake you up. Don't worry about others. Your responsibility is to wake yourself up. Could the purpose of life then be to become responsible? Responsibility is having the courage to see. To be responsible means to be open, curious, and grounded. You are either a creator or a victim. There is no other to blame. It's only self. And healing is an internal effort. So ask yourself, what do you most yearn for? Do you yearn to defend your own beliefs? Or do you yearn to see the world as clearly as you possibly can? What do you really yearn for? There's a beautiful African word which says, "You are as important to me in my journey as I am important to you." And that word is Ubuntu. And all too often, in our minds, we draw a circle of who we define as our family, and that circle is too small. If indeed everybody is important in my journey as much as I am to them, the circle needs to encompass our entire planet. We looked at the mindset of a warrior and that of a scout. I invite you to live with the grit of a warrior and the grace of a mystic. the grit of a warrior, and the grace of a mystic. Okay, I'm going to summarize what we took away from today. So 3 aspects that trick our mind into believing that our perceived aspects or perceived truth is the ultimate truth. One is called the cognitive bias. The second is the Dunning-kruger effect. And the third is the cognitive dissonance. 3 things that I've asked you to suggested that you could do to get out of your shell, the bubble that you built for yourself as your perceived reality. 1, take an inventory of your own bias. 2, evaluate your sources. And 3, take the other to brunch. So here's a question that has come about. Indoctrinations will serve you or hurt you? It depends. Indoctrinations serve as a form of culture. So culture is a form of support system. It's a comfort zone. It comes with a sense of community. And sometimes the pain of letting go of the truth is much less than the pain of letting go of community. So a lot of times people live with the tribal indoctrination, with whatever their communities believe in, or the religion or the families believe in, is because it's that thing. If you think about the evolution of humankind, we are a species that have thrived as a group, as a community, as a village. If you think about it, we are the most dominant species, at least we think that way, on the entire planet. But we are not the biggest in terms of size. We're not the fastest, right? So then how did we come into this dominating state? Is because we know how to group, we know how to gather, we know how to collaborate. And sometimes what happens is that these belief systems come with your community. It comes with your tribe. And as an individual, it takes a lot of grounding. I used that word before. We don't feel grounded, then you feel threatened by the influx of this new information that speaks against the indoctrination that you have always been exposed to. Everybody around you has the same set of beliefs. So it's something that you have to pick and choose and say, am I willing to let go of that sense of false belief if I do indeed have evidence to say that it's to the contrary? Am I willing to take up the pain of the separation versus staying asleep in the community? Thank you. Great question. With that, I want you all to stay open eyes, stay awake, stay alert, stay happy, and I'll see you all next week. Until then, be